All right, y'all. Thank you for joining the new SEC podcast. I'm Randall Ledet Jr. We got Hunter Ziesman here, and we got an extra special guest. He's been on the show a couple times, Drew Tamu. Today, we're doing our end-of-season report card and 2026 season outlook for Texas A&M. The season for Texas A&M started off super hot. They finished the year 11-2. Some highlights, some lowlights, and a lot of fun in between with some amazing talent across the board. And so we wanted to talk about how they performed at each area of the offense, the defense, the coaching, special teams, and really give you a preview of what to expect in 2026, given some of the recent happenings in the portal. So Drew, no better person to have on but you, one of the most passionate Texas A&M fans and content creators I know out there. Thoughts on this season and kind of how you're feeling?
Man, feeling all sorts of things after this one because, I mean, you look at it from afar and it really is a breakthrough season. It really is a step up over the 8-4 stuff we've gone through in the recent years or worse, and having the recent coaching change. And then to be on that hot streak to start the year, obviously the party got started with that Notre Dame game. You go 7-0 through the start of SEC play. I mean, we were on cloud nine. We felt like, this is what Elko envisioned. This is what we envisioned for A&M, and it's happening right now. But it showed that we are still a step or a few steps away from being where we truly want to get. But I think progress is progress, and we're going to take that for what it is. But if you're going to look at it with a little bit of an analytical eye, you might see a couple of holes creep into there, and we'll talk about that today. But overall, I can't help but be excited about what happened, the future, Mike Elko, a lot of the players that are coming back and players that are being added. It's a good time in Aggieland, I would say, overall. And now that we're a few weeks removed from those last couple of games, I'm starting to, see the light again. But thanks for having me on again, guys. Fun to talk about this team. Fun to talk to you guys.
Love you joining the show. It's always a good time. And I think that positive, optimistic criticism is what's going to continue to propel the team forward. There's no fall off coming. Like, how do you then carry such a good season into next year? And the portal looks good. Like, not a whole lot of guys leaving. You have some great guys going to the NFL. And like Randall said, and like you said, you're coming off of a year where you did perform well at many, many areas. There are some gaps now as a great coaching staff who attacked the portal last year. Where are those gaps? How do you attack those? A lot of potential for this team, given that they'll have a lot of core components coming back, and that's great for them. Yeah,
definitely. And when you look at this team, it was really kind of dominated from the offensive side of the football, right? It was the flashes between Marcel Reed, Casey Concepcion, Mario Craver, this running back room. And so looking at the passing offense, Hunter, go ahead and unveil the grade for the passing offense and maybe some of your thoughts and commentary around that.
Yeah, we here at the New SC Podcast, Randall and I gave him an A-. That comes with a couple things, right? Like Marcel Reed, overall, good dual threat quarterback, great improvement over last year, continuing to showcase the arm. You bring in great receivers. So looking at that, the transfer portal with the receivers, the tight ends, they did what they needed to do to outscore teams as the season went on, mostly with the passing. Where they dropped down, for me especially, is 10 interceptions in the last 6 games, one of those being Samford. So really last 5 games, there were a lot of errors at times when the ball was in Marcel Reed's hands, where he could be your savior, your superhero. He could also be, turn the ball over in critical situations like we saw at the end of the season. Drew, how do you feel about the grade? Where would you put this passing offense, with the receivers, with, Marcel Reed and kind of the entirety of the passing game?
Yeah, I really like the A- grade for this one in particular. That was really what I think took A&M to that next level this year. We saw it early and often in the year versus UTSA, versus I think it was Utah State in week 2, and then ultimately in Notre Dame. That's when we kind of had the realization that, okay, it's different this year because A&M had previously struggled with offensive, explosivity. You didn't really have that in the previous few years at A&M. And Elko wasted no time getting from 24 to 25 in adding those pieces. Obviously, KC and Craver, both portal additions, and they played a vital role this year. Marcel Reed, going into the year with Marcel, I didn't anticipate any kind of a Heisman year. I didn't really think he'd be a top 5 SEC quarterback. I thought he would be right there hovering in that, 5 to 7 range. And I think he maybe exceeded my expectations by a tad. I think he took steps this year. I think he took steps with his patience in the pocket, kind of navigating mentally when to run and when to pass and being a little bit more decisive. But there's still a lot more work to do. So where you go A minus, I'm actually going to go B plus here, just a tad lower than you guys. And I think from a whole, I can see an A minus being the grade. I'm going to deduct a little bit more for the way the year finished. And that might be a constant thread through a couple of other aspects of this exercise here. But I think overall, you feel like you have something to work with this passing offense going forward, getting Craver back, hopefully getting a couple of other receivers back from your roster, then adding some freshmen, maybe adding some in the portal. And I think you have some good framework there. But overall, I'm going to go A minus. I think the pass pro is really good. Not to skip on this O line here. I think A&M gave up maybe the fewest sacks in the conference this year, at least bottom 2 or 3. And obviously Marcel Reed's escapability helps with that. So that was a good positive, that you weren't allowing a lot of havoc to happen to your offense, not going backwards too often. But again, those late turnovers, the ability to score versus Miami, the inability to get over the hump versus Texas, that has to bring it down a little bit to me, but still something to hang your hat on for the season overall, I would say.
Yeah, when you think about that grade, right? Some of the games that kind of help propel that grade up to an A minus or a B plus, I would assume would be the LSU game, right? 2 rushing touchdowns, 2 passing touchdowns, still paired with two interceptions, and then that Missouri game, 38-17. At this point, you're on a 7-8 game win streak, 2 touchdowns in that game in the air for him. Some games that you think kind of brought that grade down, Drew. Any thoughts on those?
Well, it has to be Texas and Miami. And then, of course, there was the interceptions versus LSU. It takes it away from being like an absolute Heisman performance to saying, hey, it's good, but we still have areas to work. The South Carolina game, there was a lot of debate on whether or not that was like a Heisman feather in the cap or just showing what he can be at his worst, because we saw the best of both worlds there. We saw, both ends of the spectrum in that game. So, I think overall we got some good play from Marcel in this A&M offense, and I really think the receivers are what took it to that next level when it was at its best. But it has to be the end of the season for me that brings it down.
It's a good point on the receivers bringing that level up. A lot of plays they made after the catch, taking things from 10 yards or less and bringing them forward. I think there's some room to go with pushing the ball downfield. One of the things as I look to next year with Marcel Reed in the receiving corps, the issue may have been forced to the top 2 receivers maybe too often. There were only 4 teams in the SEC where their top 2 receivers had over 45% of the target share. You have A&M, then you have Auburn, Mississippi State, and Oklahoma. The other 3 teams didn't really have good passing offenses. When the ball gets spread to more weapons, that could be a good opportunity to where teams, have to start shifting around a little more. It seems like Miami just had that ticket. They knew the ball was going to kind of stay to these 2 guys in or around these areas. So I think as the year goes on, getting more guys involved in the passing game. It's a small nitpick criticism, but you have great receivers. Ashton Bethel-Roman, for example, that could have maybe been more involved at points in the season.
Yeah, it's totally fair. And I think Ashton Bethel-Roman being a first-year kind of producer for the team, it took him some weeks to get up to speed. And by the time he finally did, kind of mid to late season, Craver goes down with an injury. He's not himself for a couple games, has to sit a couple of games. So you're back down to 2 go-to guys. And then, later in the year, Craver comes back. Ashton Bethel-Roman's kind of banged up. So, yeah, you were kind of down to 1 or 2 go-to guys at portions of the year. But, overall, I still have to be happy about just getting that extra productivity from this room over what they had before. And going forward, hopefully Craver can become that guy next year, because he had a pretty dang good season, first real season exploding onto the scene. He was in the SEC before, but really took it to the next level this year. He has some money to make next year. And then, of course, whatever they add in the portal.
Another part of the offense was the rushing attack. This is a very run-heavy conference. And so when we do our grades, we're looking at it across the conference, across the nation. Hunter and I, as he noted, the new SEC podcast grade was an A for rushing offense. So, even with Le'Veon Moss going down earlier in the season, Ruben Owens kind of stepping in, other guys in this running back core, and then Marcel Reed, dual threat quarterback, very, very dangerous rushing attack overall.
Yeah, and honestly, like you give it an A, is that right?
Yeah.
Was it an A? I think that's actually a pretty fair grade in my, critical opinion on a curve, because no Le'Veon Moss. I think relative to that, I think an A is justified. I'll be more blunt with it. I'll go B plus because of that, just overall kind of looking at it. But I think they were impressive on the ground for most of the season. Again, we're going to have to weigh in those last 2 games where they couldn't establish a run into this thing. So I'll go down also because of that to that B plus. But, they had some good rushing attacks versus some good defenses. Missouri defense was a good rush defense. The LSU had a good defense, and A&M had some really good rushing success against those guys without their lead back. So that has to be commended. You have to give some credit to the offensive line and to the backup stable of running backs. No one running back really popping too often. I think Ruben Owens had a couple of moments, but guys like Jamarian Morrow and E.J. Smith and a couple of times Amari Daniels, the grizzled vet, they all had their moments in cultivating a rushing attack. And, of course, Marcel Reed. But, again, I'll go back to those last two games. I think maybe that was another part of why Marcel Reed struggled in those last two games. You lacked balance. You really couldn't establish a ground game against some of those tough teams at the end. So, you're losing Le'Veon for sure next year. That's not happening. Obviously, he's going pro. We wish him the best after coming out. He got injured again in that Miami game. Very unfortunate. Very sad to see him go down in that game. But, you're left with Ruben Owens and pretty much the rest of that young core of running backs to go forward with and a new offensive line. So jury's very much out on this thing going forward. I would say I like the talent in that room going forward, but a lot to reset as well.
Definitely.
Yeah,
I mean, Marcel
absolutely.
Reed was second on the team when it came to carries, right, at the quarterback position. So major respect to him and his durability, being able to handle 104 carries.
I think even going into the next year, there's more room to get him more involved into the running game. They took his designed run workload down a little bit and made him more of it's your decision. If you want to run, it seems like a lot more scramble as opposed to designed runs. I think he was about 20 fewer designed runs this year than the previous. And I think, when the run wasn't working, maybe later on, there could have been room to get his legs maybe more involved and throw some teams out of whack. You could tell going into this year that they were focusing more on his arm than his legs, but that could be something going into next year, depending on how the O-line shakes out with the changes of guys going to the draft, guys coming in from the portal. We see, Eccles coming over from LSU, what they might do to bolster this running attack at the offensive line.
Yeah, I'll add to what you were saying there about kind of the coaching and the decision not to run Marcel as much as we felt like he could have, and pencil that in. I might, involve that in my overall coaching grade later, because I agree with you. And throughout most of the year, it was kind of reasonable. It was like, what Marcel can do. You're winning games. You're very productive with this catch and run stuff. You're cultivating a running game. It's like we have the quarterback run in the back pocket. We have a pretty skinny quarterback that, you don't really have a good backup for. Why risk it? Save it for when you really need it. But then it never came. So that's definitely part of my kind of analysis of the coordinator and what we need to do going forward and all of that. Because I do feel like there were opportunities there for Marcel as a designed runner.
Definitely. Hunter, one of the things you said earlier in the season was, I think you were talking about Lenore Sellers, and you were like, why should he be running the football more? It's like, because it's fun. It's fun to watch. And, Marcel Reed's a guy where it's fun to watch him run the football. He can make those dynamic plays, and it seems to help propel his game in the air when he has the ability to also take the rock and have carries as well.
Yeah, I'd love to see him have more opportunities for that decision. He was one of the best play action quarterbacks in the country, partially because of the running attack that they did have. Not to bring it back to passing here, but like when you're so successful with that, to then give him the opportunity of more of an option to be able to take that keeper and go. We'll see. We'll see what they do with that going forward.
When we flip it to the other side of the football, one of Hunter's favorite sides of the football, defense. What are your thoughts on our grade, and what do we give them overall?
We went with a B plus, and when it's just one defense, it's so many different factors going in, because you look at the run defense and there were problems. You look at what they were doing in the pass rush, and it was so effective. One of the best in the country, second in the nation in sacks per game. But the run defense, especially down the stretch, really gashed them. So we went with a B plus here. I understand that could be maybe a little bit too positive, given the way the running defense hurt them at times in the Texas game. It could be maybe too critical, depending on the pass rush. Drew, how do you feel about this defense?
Yeah, I'm actually kind of on the border of this one. Like, I wish we had like something between a B and a B plus, because I'm right there with you guys. Because not quite, the failing test end of season test grade that the offense had in a lot of ways, because I thought they did really well versus Miami. I thought it was one of the better defensive performances of the year. And of course, be fair, there was a wind factor in that game, but I think they got after the quarterback. I think they held the run together pretty good until the end, but you held them to enough points to win the game. So I can't be too harsh on the way the season ended as opposed to the offense there. But yeah, it was a defense that did what it did well, extremely well, but the holes just kind of persisted in every game. And that was run defense. That was just, gap soundness. That was just decision-making, pursuing ball carriers, and at times tackling. So you kind of got to put it, all into the equation there. So I'll be safe. I'll go B. I'm just one below you guys. I could see a B plus there because, it led you to 11 wins. It led you to a winnable defensive performance in the playoff. So I can't be too hard on the end result and the end outcome. You had some players break out, man, and this is going to go to the positive side of the coaching discussion we'll have in a second, because guys like Des Ricks, who were, if you talk to Aggies, he was a problematic player last year. He allowed a lot of busts, and he was a really, really solid corner for A&M this year. Guys like Cassius Howell making a lot of money in a season. Guys like Tyler Onyedem coming from the transfer portal and really kind of manning the interior of that D-line and being one of our better run defenders. And, of course, you got guys like Torin York, who just announced he's going pro. You had some highlights. You had some good stuff. There was just threads of mistakes throughout the season that you hope to account for next year, you hope to pick up for next year. But overall outcome, I can't be too mad about it, despite the gripes we had throughout the season.
Something that Drew brought up that made me think about this is just how hard it is to coach when you're bringing in new players every single year. Like, I think we kind of take it for granted having in new players come in the portal, and yes, they're very talented. Yes, they can plug and play, but it's a lot different when you're in a scheme for 2-3 years. You saw the improvement from Des Ricks, like you mentioned. It's different when you know the playbook over a couple seasons and you've been able to work out with the team over an offseason or two. This defense, I go back to the schedule, there's certain games like Arkansas where they were, giving up a lot of points, or, against Notre Dame. They get a little bit of the benefit of doubt against Notre Dame because they're perceived to be a good team and they had a good record. But there was some clear gaps, like you mentioned, the rushing defense, even against UTSA. It didn't show up in the point total, but Robert Henry was having his way against this defense.
Mm-hmm.
But, you look at games like Miami, like you mentioned, they stepped up when it mattered. And even in Texas, I mean, it wasn't perfect. They were giving up a lot of first downs, but they were on the field a lot. So I give them a little bit of leeway when I look at the games they've lost and what role the defense played when it comes to that grade.
Yeah, for sure. You need complementary football to help each other out there, for sure. And I have to say, like, just to talk on the positive end of the spin, talking about the run defense, I mean, you gave up a lot of yards to some good rushing teams. I mean, say what you will about Arkansas, that was a good running team. That's what they did. You gave up like 200 plus to Missouri. They're a good running team. That's what they did. Obviously, Notre Dame had maybe the best running back tandem in the country. So, of course, you hate to give up a ton, but those are reasonable teams to give it up to, maybe a little bit too much. And then the one versus Texas is the real egregious one, right? Like, you let the explosives leak in the second half. Was not a good running team throughout most of the year. Same thing could be said about the LSU game for the first half. You gave up some explosives on the ground in that game. Not a good running team. So, works both ways how you want to slice and dice it. But again, the outcomes were the outcomes, and usually it led to wins or at least winnable performances.
And I think having such a good defensive-minded coach who schemed up such great blitz packages and being able to affect that part of the game, now you carry that forward and now you work on the other side. Because we saw such creativity coming into some of their blitzes that bring a lot from the linebacker position. Damian Sanford had a great season, when filling in there. So the defense put them in some tough spots in some games because they let up a lot of points, but the offense covered for them. So defense B plus. I think we're kind of spot on there. Third side of the ball here, like the third. We got offense, we got defense, special teams. This one's we could break this into like multiple categories because you had such a great punt returning unit, but you had a field goal unit that was not up to par. So we gave him a B plus. That's probably a little high, but I do think that Casey Concepcion, what he did as a punt returner, 18 yards on average per return, is incredible. When you're looking at the statistics around the special teams unit.
Yeah, it was to the point where every time he touched the punt, like a punt return, it's like, okay, we're getting positive yards. At least we're going to get better field position. It was that much of a weapon. I mean, all of our perception about Casey Concepcion, what he added to this team, a lot of that comes from his punt return ability and how that could just completely change a game. We saw that get the party started versus LSU on the way to that blowout win, and that's what was the difference there. And then down the stretch of the year, you saw punters have to punt around him, punt it in the ground, punt it short, punt it high, whatever it had to be to keep him at bay. So that was a massive positive, a game-changing positive, but you also had a game-changing negative with your special teams, like you said, field goal kicking, or even blocking for your field goal kicks, because you got 2 blocked in your 2 ultimate games of the season versus Texas and versus Miami. You had field goals blocked. So hard to grade this one, right? Because you're just looking at so many different aspects going into this thing, different pieces, positives and negatives. I'll go B. I'll go B here because I just think it was so good on one end and so bad on the other. I think you were pretty good with kickoffs and kickoff coverage and all that. I think that was fine. You were pretty good to, good punting the ball. I think there were some bad, some good there. But it's the part of the game that you don't really think about until it's either dooming you or helping you. So you got both of that. So I think a nice neutral B plus is fine. I'm right there with you guys.
Yeah, and I think in terms of grading, kick returns and punt returns kind of serve as like extra credit. Like, yes, you prepare to block, you want to score. You more often than not need red zone scoring from a field goal perspective, or if you get to the 40-yard line, the 35-yard line in the SEC, you need your kicker to make that kick. Like that needs to be a gimme. And I think that hurts your team more when you drive 40, 50 yards and you end up with no points, or you're in a playoff game where it's every point matters and you're not getting those field goals or you're not getting those points compared to a random kick return, which is great. It happens. Field goals, I think, matter a little bit more. And I think that played a role in our grade of a B+.
Right. And even if you're like an average, a decent field goal kicking team, this thing's in the A's to me because of what you could get on that extra credit side of things. But I think the field goal kicking alone brings it down the notches that we have it going down.
Yeah. It's such a field position battle. Like, because missing a kick, you give them the ball, but on a punt return, it sets you up for success that we saw them doing at times.
Field position is huge. In high school, I had a coach that, we, for years in this high school's existence, we had a beast board of like the best lifters that have ever gone to this high school. In his first year there, he took it down, and he put up a field position board. And it was just like, teams that start in this range have an 80% chance to score, but teams that start in this range have a 20% chance to score. So it's a big deal. Field goal position doesn't have to be a punt return, doesn't have to be a touchdown, but flipping the field is a big deal.
Yeah. And we saw it across the SEC this year, right? With teams like Oklahoma. I mean, Hunter can speak to it better and deeper than myself, but the ability to have good field position pretty much probably swung Oklahoma a couple wins, I would say, this season.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that offense needed field position, and that would be a difference maker in the big games. That was what it was. They needed a 40-yard field drive because they could kick a 40-yard field goal whenever they needed to until the end.
It's a crazy thing, the way some of these teams played out, especially ones that weren't as nearly well-rounded. But crediting a lot of that well-rounded, I guess, to our last category here, the coaching grade, very broad category, comes down to a lot of things. I looked at the portal additions coming into this year. Also now looking at who they've been able to maintain and who they've been able to re-sign to deals for the next season, looking into how the coaching impacted the season, with blitz packages and things that we discussed earlier. I give the coaching an A+ at what Mike Elko has done with this program. I know there's some things definitely to critique. They're going to have some turnover at the coaching position. We could talk about, but I think that overall they did a great job and have put this team into a position to where this could be the norm for Texas A&M going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think Elko, in terms of just personnel development, all that stuff was really, really good this year. I think even you could even look at strength and conditioning and how the team performed late and the team developed and got better this year. A lot of similar players, like this whole offensive line, most of them are around for Jimbo, and they've all stepped up. The portal additions were huge. But I'm going to drop it a little bit lower than you guys. I'm teetering between A minus. I'm still in that A margin. But that's because of what we talked about with, I don't think they utilized Marcel Reed to the fullest down the stretch of the year. So that's going to be an offensive coordinator grade. Of course, it all falls on the head coach a little bit to some degree. And then I think the gap fit stuff, how many mistakes we saw on defense, is going to drop it as well for me. So I'm going to drop 2 portions there down to an A minus for gap fits on defense. And then I just think they could have cultivated more run game with Marcel down the stretch of the year. But outside of that, thrilled with everything. Like I said at the top of the show, I'm very excited for Mike Elko. He has my trust. He has the belief of most Aggies right now because of, just like guys like Des Ricks, like I mentioned, development of players, all the guys I just listed before. That's largely coaching. I think evals are spot on. I think we saw a lot of, what you would look at as like a 3-star portal commit, like maybe I don't know what Craver was, or like an Onyeta or a Howell, and those guys panning out. To me, that's coaching. And to Randall's point earlier, getting to year 2 of a system, that's continuity, that's chemistry, and we saw that in the secondary, which I think was a strength for the team for the most part on the season, and just hitting on some of these guys. So I'm with you guys. I'm not quite the A+, but definitely an A grade for this coaching staff, and a lot of that is centered around Mike Elko.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it goes back to expectations. On our graphic, A&M had a 7.5 win total expectation from Vegas, right? And they brought back their
Sure.
quarterback after half a season. You brought back a great running back room. You brought back a lot of defenders. Mike Elko's second year in the role, coming from a Duke program, overachieved there with the resources. Kind of did pretty good last year at A&M, of course. Did good this year. Like I said, I think A plus makes sense, but I could see an A because like you said, when we look at this from a just final report card, final exam, didn't necessarily see everything you want to see at the end of the season, but the full body of work, 11-1. We are so much further from the Jimbo Fisher era right now in this portal era. I get A&M has money, but so do all the other schools, right? And they're still doing a great job getting the right talent, keeping them there, and developing them.
Yeah, and I like that you bring that up. A&M has money, but so do the other schools. And A&M brought in what you would perceive as blue chip talent under Jimbo. But there's, part of that is looking at the grades and looking what these guys are on paper and truly evaluating. And that's been spot on for A&M and Elko so far. I mean, you look at some of the stars this year. I've listed them like 3 times. I won't do it again this show. But so many portal guys, so many guys that were added and within 2 years make a huge impact or are going to go and be draft picks this year. We're All-Americans this year, a unanimous All-American, and then another All-American, not unanimous, in Casey Concepcion. So, yeah, I think bringing the right talent in, that is passing with flying colors right now. Absolutely.
Yeah. And you factor all this in, we have our overall grade before we kind of get into some of the future stuff, the transfer portal. I got all this averaging out to an A. I think you're just shy of an A+, and I think it's because of what happened down the stretch. You get to the playoffs, 12 team, you're in a favorable spot of playing a home game there, and it didn't end as you wanted. Unless you win the national championship, it never will. So, but I think an A is fair for this team. I think it leaves that little bit of room for the improvement for next year, but then still gives credit to all the positives of the year. Whereas maybe there were some things that didn't work out in certain aspects. They still brought it all together to create a very cohesive product that worked for the most part of the season. You say A, where do you got them, Drew?
Right there between an A and an A-. I know my averages might not actually show that. I think my averages might be somewhere like a B+, but I'm a strict grader. I was telling you guys off camera, I am a very strict grader with pretty much anything I'm asked to grade or rate. But the reason I bring it up a letter grade is because, you have a B+ pass offense, a B+ run offense. That you don't have to average those. Those add to each other. So to me, that equates to like an A level offense overall. So I'm going to go, I guess I'll go A, just the average of everything together. I think it was a really strong year for A&M. You made the playoff. You didn't get over the hump at the end. We're trying to get to that plus margin. Going into the year, I said a 9-win season was my concrete prediction, but I was very, very sure to make a note that this team had the framework, getting to a year 2 of a staff, that continuity to get to that 10 or 11 win margin. And they did that. So got to commend that. You got to give them the A overall because I think A&M is in a place where they haven't been looked at in quite a while. And they're still kind of early in this coaching arc. They bring some players back, have to reset in some places, but the portal's been good to them. So I think they're in a really good place going forward.
Yeah, like I said, I think you can make the case for an A-. I think you can make the case for the A. We're the new SEC podcast, and I always talk about it being the new SEC. Like, there's a lot of the new emerging teams. Ole Miss, Vanderbilt, Texas is still in the mix since they've been in the conference 2 years. Oklahoma was good this year. What A&M's done, I think it speaks volumes, and I am very impressed with what Mike Elko's been able to do at the head coaching position, what this talent has been able to do. I think Marcel Reed is overachieved. I think his running back room is overachieved. I think his defense is overachieved. But the A- to A makes sense when you factor in a home playoff game. You're playing the 10 seed. You both have the same amount of rest time, right? Miami didn't play in the conference championship, so
right.
Like, there really was no excuses for losing that game.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a great place to kind of springboard yourself forward, a great place to build off of. And here, I've always talked about on my channel how you just need to get A&M to that 10-win season and let that success breed more success because that brings the recruiting eyes. It brings players on campus. Players get more premier games to visit. And Kyle Field is A&M's best recruiting tool outside of money. So it all builds on itself. So I think it's a really good place.
Yeah, and Texas in general has a lot of money.
No, they do. They do. We're seeing it from the transfer portal already. Like, the Texas schools are eating it up. So yeah. There's money down there.
Texas Tech, man, what the hell's going on?
Crazy.
How are they doing this? Yeah.
Crazy. As we look at the transfer portal, there hasn't been a whole lot of, primary key guys leaving. We saw a couple, Bryce Anderson leaving. I know that's unfortunate after his fourth season cut short, but, you retain Marcus Ratcliffe to come back at the safety position. You have a couple other guys coming in. I know I mentioned Eccles coming over from LSU on the O line. I'll be interested to see what they do in the portal on the D line, continuing to add to that really, really effective pass rush that they had this year. As we look at the portal, it's ever changing. Like it's going to change every day. So it's tough to really get a gauge on it, but I think there's some exciting players still in the portal that could be good targets.
We love to see these SEC lineman transfers. They brought in a lineman from South Carolina and Trovon Ball. I mean, he played about, I think, 13 or 11 games last season for South Carolina. And then on the D line, you brought it up. They brought in a Colorado defensive lineman and Brandon Davis Swain. They also brought in Ryan Henderson, San Diego State edge as well. So all those guys should be good. I was surprised to see Ulstrom enter the portal for them at the tight end position, but they brought in Houston Thomas from UTSA. So right down the road from the Roadrunners.
Yeah, down the road from where I am here. Yeah, right down the road. Yeah. Those are some good additions, man. I don't think they've made the splash in the portal, but I think through a couple of years, a lot of what Elko has done has not been the splashy move. That can go for the coaching hires, a lot of promotions within the team. And when he built his staff, not too much flash. I think the most flashy guy he added was Tommy Moffitt. And Tommy Moffitt was a guy that made himself available to A&M. It wasn't like A&M went and hunted him. So I think a lot of that substance, evals, not the flashy, names, is kind of what they're going to build their brand with. And you touched on it. They're bringing in the trenches, because that's unfortunately where you lose, and that's unfortunately where you have to reset. The defensive line, in terms of rebuilding there, it feels much more achievable. You get some guys that can play football. You let them play. Obviously, you have to build the framework around them. Offensive line does terrify me to lose. You just had Chase Basantis, one of the few potential holdovers, declare for the draft today. You're only going to bring back one starter next year. So that's a very cohesion and chemistry-driven side of the football part of the team. But you're right. They bring in SEC bodies. I won't say they were prolific players, but they were guys who have the prototype measurables and the experience within the conference. You're going to get a bunch of bodies in, let them compete and see what they can learn and how they can grow together. It's very important to attack this thing with numbers. A&M has a contingent of young offensive and defensive linemen. They'll be competing for this thing. And it's apparent that they understand that, because, I just did a video on this. In short order, you address immediate needs. They're not going, like I said, for the shiny toy. They're going for exactly what they need. They add, one of the big issues in the year was gap fits, gap contain. And they add a prolific tackler in Ray Coney from Tulsa. He was the 6th leading tackler in all of college football last year. And obviously he comes from a G5 school, but that's, a veteran and a guy who is shown to do what this team was lacking. So, I'm taking everything with a grain of salt. You never know, but I've learned, I'm learning to trust the evals here. I'm learning to trust everything, but it's a big task to rebuild the trenches, right, in 1 year. That is going to be quite the endeavor. So we'll see where this thing keeps trending. You need to keep adding tackles, offensive tackles. You need to keep adding, I would say, a veteran defensive lineman. I really like the Ryan Henderson piece that you just talked about, 7 sacks at San Diego State last year. You brought in Cassius Howell from Bowling Green, who had 10 sacks in his final year there. Maybe they can kind of follow that blueprint. So definitely a lot of wait and see here, but certainly reasons to be excited.
Yeah. And if there is a shiny new toy to go get, and I haven't been on my phone for like 3 hours, so maybe something changed or something will change by the time we post this, but like Cam Coleman could be the shiny toy. I know he's all over the place unless I miss something, but that could be the shiny toy to go get. I mean, another weapon to replace Casey Concepcion. We'll see. I know he's got like a bunch of shooters out there right now.
Yeah, absolutely. A&M really didn't have, a true X go up and get it receiver this year. And that feels like the kind of player that could really help Marcel Reed in the intermediate game. So obviously, this is a guy that's, like you said, many people are after. I think his agent is doing a tremendous job right now, because there's like no smoke right now. It's like equal share. Everyone thinks they're getting him right now. So we'll see. Definitely not counting that chicken before it's hatched. It would be great to get him.
Yeah, and I think A&M is in one of the better positions to get him because you talk about a guy like Marcel Reed at quarterback coming back, a team that was in the playoffs. I'm imagining Cam Coleman wants to play for a winning team, and then the bag's going to be there, right? He's looking at LSU, he's looking at Texas, he's looking at Texas A&M, so the check will clear. That's not going to be an issue.
Check will clear.
But I'm sure he wants to play with a good quarterback like an Arch, like a Marcel Reed, and LSU's been rumored to be a part of the conversation, so we don't know if they get Sam Levitt or who's going to be their quarterback. But sure, he's prioritizing quarterback play. Could be a nice shiny toy. So it'll be interesting to see. I like the pickup they have with Tawfiq from Colorado, their safety there. He had 84 tackles this past season, played 2 years at USF. He's got 2 more years left to be able to play. Big 12 honorable mention guy. It seems like Elko can kind of take some of these guys and raise them up a higher level. I truthfully did not realize that Kashif Howell went to Bowling Green. So I'm very impressed that he was able to make that jump from G5 MAC all the way up to the SEC and be one of the best sack getters in the country.
Yeah, and the devil's advocate piece there was he had 2 years to develop here, but I'm not so sure that if Cassius Howell got more opportunity his junior year last year, he wouldn't have had a similar season because he was kind of the third down, get after the quarterback package, and he was so efficient with his snaps. So hopefully you can kind of recreate that with Ryan Henderson after losing Rylan Kennedy, who was a backup edge rusher for A&M. He just transferred to Florida State. I think Ryan Henderson has a chance to fill in nicely there.
Yeah, there's a lot of good things that will come out of it. I know you're probably going to be putting out some good content around as these players come in and who to be on the lookout for as the season gets loaded. So, we'll be sure to be on the lookout for that. And they're gonna need it when you come into this next year. A lot of people were critiquing and criticizing maybe Texas A&M didn't play the hardest SEC schedule, or there were teams that they could have that they avoided that weren't on their schedule. Next year that's not the case. Next year they will have a pretty packed SEC schedule. They have a good out of conference game with the Arizona State team that will be led by Kentucky's Cutter Boley transferring over there. But they do have a pretty tough 2026 schedule, all things considered, when you look at the game, especially picking up another SEC game.
Yeah. And, this year it didn't turn out to be that tough schedule, but going into the year, we were all talking about that schedule, how we're talking about this next year's schedule.
Right.
But with that extra SEC game in there, it obviously adds the likelihood that you're going to run into some tough teams, just playing more teams in this conference, still having a pretty good, non-con opponent in there. It's going to be tough. It's an SEC schedule, and I don't think you're going to really draw an easy SEC schedule anymore. Now that you're playing, 9 every year now?
Yeah.
You're just not going to escape it. Even Kentucky seems like they're gearing up right now with what they're doing in the portal. They're going to be a tougher route than maybe we thought before. So, yeah, it's going to be a difficult schedule. But the way I'm feeling about this thing going forward is if A&M becomes what we all think it can become, and that is an annual playoff contender that can win playoff games. I'm not even saying a national championship winning program, but a playoff game winning team consistently. They're going to have to get through these schedules. They're just going to have to. They're going to have to gear up. They're going to have to use all that money, all that oil money they have behind them. They're going to have to leverage Kyle Field, get the visits, stick to those good E-values you've been getting, and build a roster to attack the schedule, to attack LSU and Missouri on the road after playing them both on the road this year. You got to go do it again next year. Playing Texas every year, going to Norman for the first time in I don't know how long, drawing Tennessee again, going back to Alabama. We thought we escaped them. They're back. So never going to be easy. It's just how it is. It's going to be like this every year.
Yeah.
So what can I even say about it now? You just got to gear up and get ready to attack it because everyone's got it now.
I guess the question for me is, and I want to hear this from Hunter. I want to hear it from the people that are watching our show too. What are the top 3 games to you, Hunter, right now? Way too early look that might scare you a little bit.
For me, the first one, you're going on the road to an LSU team that I think will have a lot of unknowns, questionables. It'll be the first year under Lane Kiffin, and it'll be your first road test there, in Death Valley. I think that's the first one I'm looking at. And then I'm going to look at how you play in South Carolina coming off of a bye. I think I'm going to look at that one, not all just to call road games, because I think my third one is going to be that final Texas game. Now that this is a, tradition you're going to be playing every year, the final week of the year, how do you finish the season strong? You find yourself in this position again to where you're 11-0, 10-1, whatever you might be at the end of the season. How do you finish the season strong and put that capital exclamation point on the end of the season. So I think those are my three.
Yeah, I love it. Can you not let Texas become your boogeyman, right? Because you're back to playing each other. You lost the home one. You couldn't go beat them on the road when you were having a good season. Can we avoid making this a mental hurdle? Because, I mean, we don't want this to be a habit. You have to get over this hump. You get them back in Kyle Field. I think part of the sacrifice of going back to LSU and back to Missouri is that you get the Texas game at home. It's time to get that one done. I love that you bring up the South Carolina one because that is a really weird spot to play a team that should have talent. Because if you look at the way the Alabama game sits, you got Citadel before it. Normally that's reserved for like November 17th or whatever. Then you do Bama. Then you have the bye week. So it's really kind of like this Tuscaloosa island here where you're just gearing up and then kind of letting off the gas a little bit. How do you rebound from that? That's a really good one to bring up. LSU obviously early is going to be tough. I'm kind of glad we get them early. There are unknowns. At least it's not week one, but it should be a team that has some gelling to do, more so than a team that's in year 3 of a program. So maybe it's a benefit. It's going to be raucous. It's going to be insane, especially if they beat Clemson, who I think they played before. Yeah, you brought up the good ones, man. Of course, Bama's going to be tough. At Missouri, they're going to want revenge. They're going to want us not to be their boogeyman now that we're playing every year. So not an easy schedule, man. Tennessee, OU, Texas to close the thing out. It's going to be a hill to climb.
Yeah, Tennessee's been good every year, since Heupel's been there, and Alabama's going to be coming off their 3rd weekend in October. So if they're winning, they're feeling great. If they lose, God bless you if you're Texas A&M. And then Missouri, they just picked up Austin Simmons. So we saw him play a couple games for Ole Miss at quarterback. I like that fit with Drink over there in Columbia. That could be a tough team, especially on the road, second Saturday in October. There's not many misses on the schedule, and what worries me sometimes in the SEC is playing really good teams early in the season. Like I think about the Georgia-Tennessee game. Like if Georgia played Tennessee later in the season, I think they handled them easily. Early in the season, that was a very close game. So I feel like that to me has a similar vibe to what I expect that LSU matchup to be. LSU's filling out what type of team they're going to be. A&M still kind of figuring out what type of team they're going to be. That's going to be a tough one, especially I don't know where that ranks in terms of if that's LSU's first or second SEC game, but I know it's going to be rocking and rolling down there at Tiger Stadium.
Oh, yeah. It'll be if wheels were to fall off on any side, it's too early for that to happen there. So it'll be full belief, full throttle crowd, full belief by the players. That's going to be a marquee matchup right there, man, with Lane there for the first time in this what's kind of becoming a pseudo rivalry, I would say, with just how some of these games have gone in recent years. A&M finally gets back-to-back wins versus LSU. Be an interesting one, that's for sure.
Yeah. Definitely.
LSU will be playing Ole Miss the week before. They'll be in Oxford, so that'll be a fun one to come off of. I'm sure there'll be headlines everywhere that Texas A&M will have to block out. Like we don't need to hear any of this noise. Just come in and play your game. But no, it's exciting year coming off of an exciting year, going into another exciting year that should be, just as good. The team is growing, propelling. Elko is doing really, really good things. Drew, appreciate you being here. Every Texas A&M fan watching us, they know who you are. But if you'd let everybody know where to find you and some of the stuff you have coming up, so they can tune in.
Yeah, it's at Drew Tamu at Twitter, X, and YouTube. Be covering the portal right now. I'm not an insider. I'm not inside the building. I don't know what's going on, but I do love to react and break down the players that are added. So if you want to hear more about the new players joining the team, tune in. We'll be dropping that the next few weeks as this thing rolls along. And make sure you guys subscribe to the new SEC podcast. They're doing a great job, guys. Sub to these gentlemen.
Much appreciated. Yeah, no, Drew's one of the best in the business. We love having him on, and we really try to bring on the best guests that really put a lot of passion when it comes to college football. Drew's had some amazing coverage this year. Good season for A&M. We're excited for next year. So everyone subscribe to his channel, follow his X account. I think we follow each other. So as always, if you like college football content, we got some great content coming up here. Portal, draft content, special segments coming up here. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It's not too late. And as always, I'm Raylan Jr. We got Hunter Ziesman, Drew's here, and it's a new SEC podcast.